Welcome back, Warrior Fam. Woohoo! Thank you so much for joining us again this week. We have a great topic for y'all. We're going to be talking about when anxiety mixes with other really big emotions.
When they decide to be on a team together.
Yes, sometimes it's super intense.
Yeah.
Super intense in the body, intense in the mind, intense thoughts, and could produce a lot of extra anxiety because of this other big, big emotion.
Yeah.
So, Abby, why don't you kick us off?
Yeah. With a story?
Tell us a story about how anxiety showed up and it was not alone.
Not alone.
It wasn't mixed with some stuff.
Came with a friend. So first I want to say, I love talking about emotions, right? Like emotions, I love hearing about people's emotions. I love hearing how they feel them in their bodies, how they come up in their behaviors. I love talking about how emotions drive behavior. So hopefully we have more emotion chats in the future. I mean, I know we talk about anxiety, right? But we can branch out to other emotions. And I will say that the story I'm going to share, part of the experience of the story was definitely flavored by some podcasts I had been listening to at the time. And I think they were like Invisibilia or something like that. It was a while ago. It was when I still lived in New York. And I remember hearing two stories, two different podcasts about emotions, and how one woman was sharing how as kids, people teach us emotions by telling us how we feel, even if it's not correct. And so what I mean by that is maybe I'm on the playground and, a kid takes a toy I'm playing with and I make a face, and then a grown-up comes over and is like, oh, you're sad, or, oh, you're frustrated, or, oh, you're whatever. And then I learn that those sensations create these emotions, right? Those sensations are the emotions. When maybe I was happy the kid took the toy, maybe I was ready to move on, right? So there was that. And then there was this thing about some woman just talked about how we don't really understand emotions, and how they are more understanding the sensations more than anything else, and how labeling can help, but it also hinders us in the experience of emotions, right? So these things were swirling in my head when this story happened. So I was teaching at a school, at a middle school. I had been there for a number of years, and I was always teaching in the gym. And the gym was in the basement of this middle school in the New York City area. And it didn't have air conditioning and it didn't have heat. And so in the springs and summers, it was hot down there. In the falls and winters, it was cold down there. And in the winter, it was pretty cold because they had these windows that didn't really close. So then they would put these wooden boards up.
Gotcha.
So sometimes during the winter, me and all the kids would wear jackets until it got warm enough to take our winter jackets off.
Wow.
Okay? Yeah. And this was a school that gave a lot of tours. So they were always showing parents everything, and they were super proud of the yoga and mindfulness program. And they would always bring people down to the gym. And there was always this one gentleman who I didn't really know, but he would come down, he would pretend he cared about yoga and mindfulness, and then he would leave. And so I had just ended one of my classes when they were coming down. And so the parents came over and wanted to ask me hey, we want to ask you about this program and this and that. And the mother at one point says to me, is it always cold in the gym like this? Or is it always cold in the winter? I don't even remember which one it was. And I was like, yeah, it's definitely cold in the winter. Right. And that was it. I said that I was wearing my winter jacket. Yes.
Stated the obvious.
And so then they're like, oh, cool. Program sounds great. Blah, 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 blah. And then they're getting ready to go. And the guy that's giving the tour comes over to me and he's like, hey, let me talk to you for a second. And I was like, okay. And he takes my hand and he introduces himself to me. right? But all he does is say his name. He doesn't say his role. And then he pulls me close to him and he says, "Don't ever say that again." And then
Oh
he
my
walks
God.
away. And I was like, "Oh, what?" Like,
did he tell you what not to say again?
Don't ever say how it's cold in the gym.
But did he say that? Or
Yeah.
did you just assume that that's the part
No,
that he
that
didn't
was
want
the
you to
part
say?
that he
He
didn't want me to
said,
say.
"Don't ever say it's cold in
Yeah.
the gym again."
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. Because it made them, I
Sure.
mean, he interpreted it like it made them look bad, right? Which I don't
Sure.
agree with. So I'm like, okay, right. And so then I'm just like shook. Like,
Yeah.
I don't feel right on the inside. I can't focus. It's like super jumbly and uncomfortable in my body. You know, I'm like super anxious, but there's something else going on. And so I like ride home from the bus and I'm like processing it and I'm like trying to notice what emotions are happening and I'm trying to figure out what is going on. Like I'm like telling myself like, you didn't do anything wrong. You were just being honest. He just didn't like what you said. Like I was, you know, I was befriending it. I was companioning it. I was seeing it from, you know, like multiple perspectives, but I couldn't let this feeling go. And I talked to friends about it and they reflected the same stuff, or they like dismissed this guy as being a jerk, or, you know,
Right.
whatever it was, like, or they're like, oh, he was just afraid that you were making them look bad. And I could understand it, but I couldn't let the feeling go. And it was for 3 days straight. It was 3 days of just complete discomfort in my body and complete like confusion. I didn't understand how I was feeling. And I just didn't understand the situation. And so it was like so much harder for me to focus. You know, it was so much harder for me to like be present because it was like this shaky discomfort in my body. And it was like this feeling of like, there's something wrong, there's something wrong, there's something wrong. But it wasn't just the anxiety side of it. And then I remember like the third day, I was like on the bus somewhere. I don't know where I was at this point. And all of a sudden I was like, oh, this is shame. And literally like the moment I gave voice to my feelings, it like started to lift. And I actually got really curious about it. And I was like, wow, I don't feel like I've felt this level of shame before. And then also I was like, I don't actually really feel shame now that I think about it. But it was such a fascinating experience. And it really gave me a lot of compassion and empathy for students who are shamed all the time, children, right? Who are shamed all the time.
Yeah.
And probably feel that utter crap in their body. Like it's so uncomfortable. Right. And like they have probably no awareness that they're feeling ashamed or shame in that moment. So,
Yeah. Wow. I mean, he humiliated you.
Yeah.
Right. Because whether or not anyone else was around to be a witness,
he made sure to
the
do
interaction.
it in private. He did it. He didn't let the parents see what he did to me.
Of course not.
Yeah.
Because it sounds like the one mom was, at least the way you told it in the story, that like she wasn't like, what is it always this cold in here?
Yeah.
And if she had said it like that, which as a parent, a concerned parent, right, that seems rational to me.
Yeah.
And if anything, the man should have addressed the parent's concern or question. If he really thought it was that much of a threat, right? You weren't the culprit. and as whatever kind of school official or whatever, I don't know what his role was in the building, but it seems like the onus was on him to then make sure that the parents, you know, say reservations about the temperature in the building in this particular space is addressed, or that they acknowledge that, yeah, it's a little bit of a struggle down here. Whatever, he could have handled that in so many different ways. So like, I just want to acknowledge that I felt very there with you and triggered myself when you told the part about how he touched you without consent
and pulled me in.
And then pulled you in, and the proximity, that very intimate way of speaking.
Yeah.
To anyone. And that's what you mentioned there at the end about like how kids are shamed all the time and they're humiliated. They're told what they're feeling and how they should be. And there's not a whole lot of empathy or wiggle room in terms of like how they react to the way you speak to them. And yeah, I mean, so like I could feel what that might have felt like if I were in your shoes in that situation.
Yeah. And I mean, there was anxiety too. Am I going to get fired? You know,
right.
Like, am I going to get
this
a
person
talking
tell
to?
someone? Yeah.
Right. Like there was all these other, like I could feel the fear. I could see the anxiety. Like there was all these other emotions, but then there was this like heavy, tingly, unable to sit still, jittery, like heavy discomfort that just flooded my body for 3 days. And it wasn't until I named it shame that I was like, oh my God, like what is this? Right. Cause I could handle all the other things. Okay. They're going to tell that I said this. Like, I'm sure we can figure out a way to move through that, or, but it was
sure.
Yeah.
I love so much about so many of the things you shared were like, you were using your tools and practices. You were trying to reframe. You were talking to trusted loved ones and friends and colleagues or folks that you knew would help you to maybe see the situation the same, to validate your experience, or a little bit differently.
Right.
It sounds like they were at least able to offer you that.
Yeah. Did I say something super messed up? Tell me, like,
because the beautiful part in it is that while that some of that language that they used or some of the things that you tried may have supported you eventually, they didn't work at that time. They weren't enough for you. And what it sounds like I'm hearing, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that you felt completely free after you were able to label the feeling. What is this discomfort? And then it gave you the opportunity to be curious about why that emotion came up.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean that it was like a lightness. It was the weight had lifted. And, when I was doing all my practices, like when I'm breathing, when I'm companioning myself, when I'm asking my community for support, like, I'm labeling the emotions, like I'm doing all the things, right? But I just didn't realize that one piece, which was like, I didn't name the actual like heavyweight emotion that was with anxiety at the time, right? Because I knew I was anxious, right?
Yeah, right.
But it was that naming the other piece of it that then like I felt freer, and I felt like literally, I remember it just feeling like the weight was lifting and like flying away from me.
Here's a question. Did you have to go back to that school within the time frame before figuring it out? Or was it like, the next time you went to the school, you had already kind of come to terms with everything that had happened and been able to move through it?
I only was at that school once a week.
Perfect. Got
it. It took me 3 days. It definitely took me 3 days, but yeah, I had definitely navigated and sorted through all of the different feelings. And by the time I was back, I felt like a little unease, like, because it's like,
sure,
are they going to have to talk to me? Right.
Yeah.
But then no one actually even had heard about it. Like I went to the principal and I was like, hey, this happened. And she was like, not a big deal. And I was like, okay.
Yeah. Right. Well, that's incredible too, though, that you actually took charge of the situation in a way, because you spoke to the person at the wheel.
Yeah.
The one person that is fully at the wheel said, hey, this actually happened to me while I was here last week. And I just want to make sure like everything's fine, everything's good, and the fact that this person hadn't even heard about it, but you gave them information that maybe it was interesting for them.
I mean, the response did seem like, oh, I'm not surprised that person did that.
Interesting.
Yeah.
More validation, I guess.
Right. Exactly. Don't worry about it. You didn't do anything wrong. Like, yeah.
I mean, did you ever have to be in the room with this individual again?
I mean, I'm sure. I mean, I was at the school for many years, so I'm sure that I saw that person in passing. I'm sure it didn't even register to him. Right. I genuinely think like that's just his personality. Like he just, goes around shaming people if they do things he doesn't agree with. And he definitely is, a person of power in that space. And so he probably doesn't even realize,
right.
I mean, I'm sure he realizes his power, but he probably doesn't realize his impact.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And clearly if you're saying the principal said that it was, or implied that it wasn't a surprise, then I'm sure that he, on some level, he may know that he maybe has a reputation around the building for certain things and gets away with it clearly. Right. Yeah. And so it's interesting just thinking about, back to our previous episode about toxicity in the workplace and, with being in community with people. And it's hard as an independent contractor too, right? Going into a site where these aren't your colleagues in the same way.
Yeah.
And so I'm sure that maybe added an extra layer of anxiety or emotion onto it. It's just like, oh, these aren't even my direct bosses.
Right.
Right. And maybe that makes it easier, or maybe it doesn't. Could be more complicated. Who knows? So,
right.
Yeah, I think, and emotions are complicated. And I'm really glad that you brought up what it's like for kids, because I feel like so many adults out there, parents, teachers, educators of any kind, and yoga and mindfulness professionals, whatever. It's just such a powerful reminder that kids are people. And if we struggle to companion and deal with and navigate and label our every emotion, imagine how much more difficult it is for developing brains.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's so interesting.
Can be
Super
scary.
interesting. Yeah. So like, I know you kind of mentioned this, but like, how did it feel in your body once you were able to like, let it all go?
It was like baseline again. It was like
Right.
For 3 days, I didn't feel like myself. For 3 days, it was like there was a version of me that was just carrying around this discomfort. And it didn't matter what I did. It didn't matter if I practiced yoga. It didn't matter if I breathed. It didn't matter if I talked it out. It just was there. And when I finally like named it, it just felt like I went back to baseline. Like it literally like I don't like saying things felt like magic. Like I don't like saying that stuff, but like that's the best way I could feel it. Like it felt like a magical moment. The moment I named it, it like really just like floated away. And I was like, wow.
That's what you needed, right?
Yeah.
Amazing. Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing.
Thanks for listening. What's your when anxiety teams up?
Teams up.
Yeah.
The bad team. We've said so many times that how often two or more things can be true at once.
Yeah.
Right. And how reality for one person is not necessarily the reality for another, even if it's surrounding the same circumstance. And obviously we teach mindfulness, and we are used to offering folks the opportunity to notice their experiences exactly as it is, right? Without trying to look at it from a curious lens, or without judgment, changing or fixing. It's like, what's showing up in the body? What's showing up in the mind? What are my emotions? What's my environment like?
Yeah.
Or any of my known triggers around this environment that can sometimes help me experience anxiety with other emotions in a big way. And so like it's funny because I have one story I want to share, but really quickly ahead of it, I was just thinking about how often I experience rage with anxiety.
Yeah.
And I remember distinctly, I was driving to meet you to be your assistant at a training. And I left extremely early, and I knew I was like, once it was like halfway through, I'm like, oh my God, I'm hitting a wall. This traffic is even worse than normal. And traffic gives me so much anxiety and rage. Just intense amounts. I'm like, I remember distinctly being like wall to wall. And like, I was texting you already preemptively apologizing because I knew I was going to be late. And I was just sending you like angry car gifts, and which is what I do. I just send ridiculous gifts and memes to people. And you were laughing, and it's okay. But like, I had so much stress and anxiety in that moment, but that wasn't it. It was rage too.
Yes.
And just like that shaking, mad, like, I need to get the F out of here. Otherwise I'm going to and I'm yelling horrible things in my car, things I don't mean, things I would never want to actually come true. And I'm just so intensely angry sometimes, especially if I feel like I'm going to be late for something.
Yes.
And especially if that thing I'm going to be late for is a work type thing. I've always held myself to a standard of like, you don't just show up on time, you're early.
Right.
And anything else is unacceptable.
Yeah. Not good enough. And I love how you're sharing about rage in the car, because so I have a very similar experience, right? I do like a lot of screaming, like
legit.
Yeah. I mean, I haven't been driving in a while, so I don't have the road rage, but when I've told people this, people are like, well, aren't you a mindfulness teacher? Aren't you supposed to be calm? And I'm like, mindfulness does not mean you're calm. Like when I'm screaming in the car, I'm curious about the experience, but I'm also going to release the emotion.
You're
Right.
also a person.
Like,
Mindful people are still allowed to be angry, y'all.
Yes. Right. Mindfulness does not mean calm, collected all the time.
Yeah.
And so I just love that you are highlighting that part, because you're like, we're mindfulness teachers and you're sharing the story about rage. Right. And you can still be a mindfulness practitioner. You can still embody mindfulness. You can still teach mindfulness and have rage.
Exactly.
Right? Like both things are true.
Can be true. Both things are true. Exactly. Yeah. So the bigger story that I want to share, and it's funny because I felt kind of triggered when you mentioned being touched without consent, because that's sort of a little bit about what my story is about. So I was out to dinner, and we were getting ready to leave dinner, and one of the older gentlemen at the table didn't ask me if I wanted my coat to be put on for me. Instead, he took my coat that was in my hands.
Yeah.
It was in my hands. He took my coat and held it up. And immediately I felt uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Right. It was like, in the moment, I felt uncomfortable immediately. And it was like, Margot, do you deal with the situation?
Right.
Or do you just do the easy thing and put the coat on, or have the coat be put on for you?
Yeah.
And leave and be done with it. And I chose the former, which was a big thing for me, because typically especially when it's like the night's wrapping up, everything went well, everything's great, and there's no reason to get into a thing. But I also at the time didn't know it was going to become a thing.
Right.
And all I saw was, oh, my jacket's been removed from my hands. It's being held up for me in a gesture, by the way, that I understand, especially for people from certain generations, that is supposed to be considered, being kind or being helpful. For me, it's always felt misogynistic and condescending.
Yep.
And so I'm sorry if you're listening and this triggers you in any real way, but this is how I've always felt about this act. You don't see a whole lot of men's coats being put on by women in the space, no matter what their relationship is to that person. Yep. Anyway, I digress from that, but I put my hands back on the coat, and with a big smile, I was like, oh, no, like, I got it. And this person was not okay with that response.
Wow.
And so, right. And so now I went from having a little bit of discomfort and anxiety to having heightened anxiety.
Yeah.
Right. Because now
you spoke up.
Right.
But in a kind way, rather than being like, no, thanks. Nope. Like you were kind
and that
about
should have been okay too. Right. And that's what wound up happening a little bit, because I got more and more angry as this interaction continued, which it continued for a good, maybe in my body, it felt like 20 minutes. It wasn't. It was like 2 minutes.
Yeah.
2 minutes isn't an insignificant amount of time, by the way, when you're already walking towards a door.
Yes. Yeah.
And so now I've got my hands back on my coat, and I say, no, I got it. And then it's, no, I've got it. No, I've got it. Right. And now we're in a power struggle over my coat, which is going to go on my body.
Right.
And so, I'm not speaking about my husband. Let's just be clear about that.
Right.
And Adam knows more than what. And look, I'm all for being chivalrous to all people. I love holding doors for people. I'm very happy if someone holds the door for me, but there are we all have our things that we're comfortable with, things that we're not comfortable with. And I think that it's a practice for all of us. And it was a practice for me in the moment to take my own jacket and put it on for myself. That's what I wanted.
Yeah.
And that should have been the end of it. Right. Yes. And it wasn't. And so then inevitably, ultimately what happened was, after this kind of awkward standoff, gave me my coat and I put it on myself. When I say gave, it was kind of like tossed at me a little bit. Like my hands were already on it, but it was kind of like he let it go, and it was like arms up kind of thing. And he was visibly angry, face red. His voice was starting to escalate. My voice had started to escalate too, as I got more and more upset again about my coat on my body. So we leave. Things are not copacetic outside when we're trying to say goodbye. We're all pretending it's back to normal. at least it wasn't for me. I don't know what the experience was like for these other people.
Right.
I just know what it felt like for me.
Right.
So what I was going through was sort of like many folds of emotions. For the most part, during and a lot after, I was shaking. I was hot, like very, very physically sweaty. I was breathing uncomfortably, just very shallow and hard, just like fully not embodied, 100% not embodied. And so, I get in the car and I'm like, that's when the rage comes, because I feel like I feel safe, right? I'm back in the vehicle. And so I'm very angry. And so I feel like this super fiery intensity in my belly and in my chest. And I'm yelling and I'm like, and I'm cursing and I'm like, how dare you? Blah, blah, and I'm really, really angry.
Yeah.
And that was sort of like the, it's like the 5 stages of grief, right?
Yeah.
It happens in waves. And so I went from being really, really just upset and shaken, like you had said in your story, and like, what the hell just happened and why did that happen? To then feeling really, really angry. And then not dissimilarly feeling humiliated and shamed for the choice that I wanted to make, right? For myself. Something as ridiculous. And I know, like, I'm sure there are people listening that are like, why didn't you just let clearly it was a thing. Maybe it was generational. Maybe it wasn't. Just let the person put the coat on. No, that wasn't the point. The point was that I should have free autonomy to put my own coat on if that's what felt right in my body in that moment. And maybe it would have been different another day. I have no idea.
Right.
But like, we all need to make these decisions for ourselves. So like, that's the deal. That's the story. And so what wound up happening is that I went from being really shaken and worried, right? Like, oh my God, like this was really uncomfortable. I just want to run and hide, to then being like so steaming mad, like ready to pop, ready to boil and like murder something, like stab something. And then just feeling like complete dog shit. Just like shame and humiliation. It's just like, well, this is fun.
Right.
And then, ultimately it wound up being like, this is nothing to do with me. Right. And where I found the peace in all the time since, and this was years ago, but the story still sticks with me. It still sticks with me enough for me to share it today, because it did run me through the gamut of emotions. But when I ultimately felt peaceful, which it took a little while, but when I ultimately felt peaceful, it was because I realized that everything that had happened in the interaction had nothing to do with me, really. And it had everything to do with that other person. It had everything to do with that person's need for control, that person's maybe personality type, whatever. And so once I was able to say, oh, I did nothing wrong, kind of like you, I did nothing wrong.
Yeah.
Right. And I'm able to allow myself to ride this wave of all the feelings as normal people are going to experience, being able to label them one at a time.
Yeah.
Right. As I was going through them, and then being able to say, this has nothing to do with me.
Right.
This isn't about me.
Right.
This could have been anybody. And the same interaction probably would have happened.
Right.
Right. If I have to assume, I mean, I can't say for certain, but I got enough information to believe that this has nothing to do with Margot and everything to do with whatever someone else's problems are.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So, all right. So, I feel light rage in my body hearing the story, right? Like, because I think that, consent has not been taught to many generations, and asking for consent and knowing how to do it and understanding body autonomy and and so, that is something I'm really passionate about teaching about, because also I didn't learn about it until, and so for me, when I'm hearing it, right. And then you talk about the shame and the humiliation, the way I hear it, right. And your experience might be different, and we'll get to that part, or it might be the same. The way I hear it with the shame and humiliation, like the narrative that would go in my head is, why can't I just be easygoing? This isn't a big deal. Why am I making a big deal? I should just let it go. I understand this gesture is being kind. Why,
Yeah.
And yeah. Okay. So that was like
totally.
The shame and humiliation. Right.
100%.
And it's so messed up how at some point we're told, don't be difficult. Don't make moves, don't make waves, like just deal with what you're handed,
Right.
you know, like
don't go out of your cage that you've been raised to be in.
yes.
Right. As boys, as girls, as men, as women, right? Like, here's the box that you're supposed to be in, and how don't even dare to step out of it.
Right.
Is kind of what I'm hearing from what you're saying too, which
Right.
I totally agree.
Right. Don't question your elders. This person is doing something nice. Just let them do it, even though you
in
feel
my day,
uncomfortable in your body, even though you don't want it. It's like, well, suck it up and deal with it. That
was basically what I was getting.
Yeah.
I was getting, this is what I do. That language was there. This is what I do. This is how I was raised. These words came up. And it was like, I get that you're trying to justify this act, but I have to stand firm here. If I don't, what does that tell me about me?
Right.
If I don't stand, I said no once, right? One and done should have been it, but it wasn't.
Should have been.
And so I have a choice. I either keep standing my ground, or I concede. Right. And why the fuck should I concede? Right? We're talking about my physical space, my body. Yeah. Why the hell should I? What kind of messaging is that?
Exactly. Right? And what is the message that we are giving to children when we're like, don't make moves, right? Just accept it. Even if it's uncomfortable, just accept it. Right? Even the stuff like, you know, when like aunts and uncles come and see their nieces and nephews and they love them. And it's like, well, give them a hug.
Go give them a hug. Yeah, exactly.
It's like, what are we teaching them from a very young age? Is like, you know, accommodate the people in power.
That's right. Make everyone else comfortable, even at the expense of your comfort.
Yeah. These people are doing it out of love. So don't make waves. Don't, you know, don't make it weird by saying no. Yeah.
Right. And I'm sure that other people that were a party to this interaction probably felt really uncomfortable too.
Yeah.
You know?
Right.
But it's interesting though, too, because nobody came to either of our defenses in the moment.
Yeah.
Not that would have helped necessarily. And maybe it would have made it worse, but maybe not. I don't know. Right. And so it's just another thought for anyone that's maybe triggered listening to the story is that, like, if you witness somebody, you know, coping or struggling to deal with an interaction that's uncomfortable, you have a choice too. Right. Yeah. You can step in and say something or assist the person from either perspective too. Like, you know, there are ways to maybe squash that person's feelings about, like, well, I'm just being chivalrous and this is what I do and this is what I need right now or whatever. And then there's the people on my side of it who may be able to be like, do you see that she's saying no? Right. Like, whatever the interaction might have been, but there are things that bystanders can do as well.
Yeah.
Even if they're loved ones, even if you're uncomfortable by it too.
Right. What now, if it, like, looking back at it now, what would have helped you? Like, would it have been more supportive if someone was an ally and said something in the moment? Was it better the way it worked out in hindsight? You know,
I really don't know. I don't know what would have been, if anything really would have made me feel better in the moment. I don't think so. Yeah. I think that if somebody were to have cut in, it would have sort of broken the immediate detention that was in the immediate, right? But then I don't know that the outcome would have been any different.
Right.
It was cut off really quickly, but it wasn't. And so it was allowed to go on as a back and forth power struggle for, like I said, a couple of minutes, at least a minute.
A power struggle.
So imagine how long, like, it's funny because I was listening to the Office Ladies earlier. Shout out to Office Ladies. Angela Kinsey and Jenna Fisher host a podcast about their time working on the show The Office, which we know I'm obsessed with. They were talking about how a lot of times on the show, it'd be written in the script that, like, there's going to be an uncomfortable pause. Right. And it was like, and so what these two women who host this podcast do is they go back and watch the episode and, like, get all the juicy details and, their memories are jogged from working at the time and being on the set and making the show. And so they were doing an episode, and somebody counted how many seconds there was pause between somebody saying something and the person responding, right? And they would do this a lot on the show, just to build, right, to build the energy, to build the excitement or the fear, the anger or the discomfort. And more often than not on The Office, it was awkwardness and discomfort.
Yes.
And so it was 7 seconds. And like, when re-listening to it, I'm like, oh my God, I remember how awkward it was waiting to see when that other character was going to respond to the initial character.
Yeah.
And so like, imagine 60 seconds of back and forth. I mean, yeah, there was no dialogue, so that made it even more uncomfortable. This was a back and forth with dialogue. But still, that's a long time to be in a power struggle. And that didn't need to be in existence.
Right. And it didn't need to be. And you were advocating for yourself and what felt right for you. Right. I mean, honestly, like, it's ridiculous. It's like ridiculous that even happened, like not your experience of it, but and I mean, I think ultimately, like, what I hope people take from your story is ask for consent. You just don't know. You just don't know. And it's not a rejection on you. Like, if I was like, hey, Margot, can I put your jacket on you? Which is weird, right? But if I was like, Margot, can I put your jacket on you? And you said no, I wouldn't feel like, oh my God, she hates me. I'd be like, oh, okay, no, that doesn't work for her.
And I also just want to say that, like, and so I mentioned that, like, this wasn't my husband this interaction happened with, but like, and Adam it's not that he's never offered to help me on with my code.
Right.
And every once in a while, if, it'll be an offer, it's a question. And then it's either a yes or a no. And then that's the end of it.
Yeah.
But more often than not, like, it's not like if I'm struggling to get my arm in a sleeve and someone sees that I'm actively struggling and then they like move the sleeve, like, okay, like, that's obviously not what we're talking about here. Right.
Right.
No. It's not like this person needs assistance getting their coat on. Right. And so, like, to me, it wasn't about, I didn't need anyone's help in that moment. In fact, it was the exact opposite. I had the coat in my hands. I was ready to put it on.
It's like infantilizing. It's like,
exactly. Right. Exactly. And I know, look, maybe, people out there think it's amazing when their coat's put on for them. That's awesome. If that feels great and that person, and that's the nature of your relationship with a person, or then awesome. Like,
own it.
We're not saying it's bad to help someone on with their jacket, not by any stretch. It's bad to not ask for consent. And then when that person says no, for whatever reason they have, and you're not necessarily privy to that reason, whatever reason they have, you have to accept it.
Right.
Accept the answer and let it go. Literally let go of the coat. And so, but again, I like to, when I remember this moment, I love remembering how intense the wave was.
Yeah.
Because each emotion was together, but it was mostly separate.
Right.
It was like, I experienced this, but then, it's like, imagine a relay race but you're in a team, right? And it's like the baton gets passed from anxiety to rage. And then the baton gets passed from rage to shame and humiliation, right? And it doesn't sound like a fun race to be in, although I wouldn't be running.
Sometimes they're all holding hands. Like, sometimes it's like, and then they pass it on, and then they're
totally
catch up together and have a little party, and then someone else takes the baton.
Right. But then guess what? You finish the race. Right. Yeah. And so that's the greater point here, is that when I finished this race, when I came to feel really peaceful about the situation, is when I reminded myself that this interaction had nothing to do with me.
Right.
At all, at its core. And maybe it speaks to greater societal problems, to things that need to be addressed, and how we treat people.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I think it's important for all of you warriors out there to remember that anxiety doesn't always stand alone.
Yeah.
And it can often it may not even just be that it's with other emotions. It may happen to feel like other emotions too. It's complicated. It's sticky. It can feel really uncomfortable, just like the anxiety itself. And so what we hope that you will take away is that it's normal to experience a lot of different kinds of emotions, big emotions with your anxiety. And it sounds like, at least from both of our experiences, that being able to spend the time being curious about the situation, consulting the community, but ultimately really spending a while allowing yourself to acknowledge all the things that you went through in terms of your feelings.
Yeah.
And being able to name it and label it is empowering.
Yeah. Which is the active practice of the week.
Perfect segue.
Yeah. Name it to tame it. Active practice. It's the active practice.
All right. Why don't you lay this out for us, Abby?
Yeah.
What is our active practice?
Active practice is name it to tame it. And in the most simple form, it's name what you're feeling and you get a little bit more control over it. It literally like what's happening is in the limbic area of our brains, like some big emotions kind of overtake, and it's a lot harder to get access to our thinking part of our brain, our prefrontal cortex, when we're having big emotions. When we can name the experience, we get more access back to our prefrontal cortex in how we want to tame it and handle it. Sometimes it's hard to name what you're feeling, like I did. I had no idea I was feeling shame. I was naming all these things and none of them worked. And so another way to think about naming it to taming it is really noticing the sensations of your body. Are you feeling high energy? Are you feeling low energy? Are these feelings pleasant or unpleasant? And this kind of goes in line with the Ruler program. The Ruler is an SEL, social emotional learning program out of Yale. And they actually have a beautiful graph that has quadrants of high energy and low energy and pleasant and unpleasant emotions. And so sometimes if you don't know what you're feeling, you can literally like Google this graph. And I think it's called the mood meter and see like, oh, where do I fall? And so sometimes you don't need to actually name the emotion, just naming, oh, I'm high energy and I'm unpleasant and I'm noticing tension and heat, right? Sometimes that even just like the acknowledgement is the naming part that helps tame it. And then sometimes like getting a name or a word like shame was what helped me in that moment.
I love that.
Thanks.
Yeah. And I love that you brought in that part at the end about just, it doesn't necessarily have to be an emotion or a feeling word that you label or that you name. It can just be sensations and what they feel like.
Yep.
And all of it is just a greater way of continuing to actively practice, getting to know yourself.
Yeah.
Because the better you know yourself, the more questions you ask yourself, the more curious you are about your inner and outer and emotional experience, the better you're going to be at being able to be okay with, or maybe at least come to terms with the anxiety or the emotions that you're experiencing.
Yeah.
Even if it takes you a while to move through them, right? Even if you're riding that wave still, or you are in that weird relay race or whatever it is, just knowing that there will be an end sometimes is all I need to. Right. Awesome. So we hope that you will try this out, name it to tame it. And we've talked about it on Instagram before too. So if you're not following us over there, join us at Anxiety Warriors Podcast. Share lots of fun videos and reels and guest interview highlights and silly memes, and it's just a good time. It's an all around good time. And of course, every once in a while we try to throw some information at you as well. And some hopeful, not hopeful, although maybe helpful strategies, things for you to give a try.
Yeah. So Margot, before we end, do you have a win of the week?
I do. I sure do. My win is very simple today. My win is that it's today we're recording, it's mid-October, and it's been pretty chilly here in New York the last few days. It's felt like true fall, which I don't super love. I don't hate it, but I don't super love. We know I'm a summer girl. And so today was it's like 75 degrees. It was warm and beautiful, and I was able to like put my summer clothes back on for the day, and that felt awesome. And I was able to give Hurley Boy a nice extended walk today because it was just so perfect out.
That's huge.
That is my win. Yeah.
Yes. Sometimes a win is just a sunny day.
Exactly. Yeah. Oh, that's like always my win. That's always a mini win for me. If it's a sunny day, even if it's freezing cold, it's a win if the sun is out. So we hope that you join us on Instagram. We hope that you love this episode and can find some time in your day, in your week, to think about the ways that emotions, big or small, sometimes are hanging out with your anxiety. And how they show up, and some of the ways that you might be able to navigate them a little bit better with a little bit more kindness and love. Also, warriors, if you want to reach out to us and connect in any way, you can send us an email at anxietywarriorspodcast@gmail.com and tell us your wins of the week. Let us know if you're interested in being a guest on the podcast. You have an anxiety story to share. We'd love to hear from you. Or send us some topic ideas, anything we haven't chatted about yet that you're interested in hearing us talk on.
Yeah. We want to hear from you. Well, thank you all so much for going on this journey with us. We're so grateful you're here.
Till next time.